Vesta had the good fortune of living close to Baba's Mandali from 1973 to 1979. She spent many years at Mehera and had the privilege of developing close relationships with those who resided there, as well as with Adi and Padri. She witnessed firsthand how the Mandali first heard about Jim Mackay's claims. She will share some of her remembrance of those significant years.
I'm kind of revamping a little bit of what I was going to talk about originally because Mehera covered quite a bit of it. And I was just talking with Peter about the presentation. I'm going to save the experience that I witnessed in Adi's office when Mr. Mackay came in the office and made his pronouncements. I'm going to save that for when the tapes are. And also what I was going to talk about the concern that Mehera had and how she expressed it over what was happening with Sufism Reoriented when I was staying at Mehera, what I witnessed and what I was asked to do to help her through that. I'm going to save that also for the tapes because we think it'll flow a little bit better and easier. But I wanted to... two things happened to me when I was listening to Mehera talk, when she was talking about how important it is to let nothing stand between you and your master, you and your beloved, you and your connection with God. And one of the things that happened when I was at Mehera, every now and then Mehera would think that I was working too hard and too long and that I needed a break. So she was always thinking of a place to send me. And one of the places she sent me was up into Kashmir. She wanted me to go find Jesus' tomb, see where Chanji had been buried, and see where Baba had done some must hunting. While I was up there, the people I was staying with happened to be involved with a man whose name, who was the little boy to this fakir that Baba contacted to find musts. Now, this was all serendipitous. I didn't know this man. I didn't plan to go see him. He just happened to be there. And he was a little boy and walked with Baba on some of the times when we found musts. And he took me way up into the mountains, and we did all this rock climbing. And there was a must, and I didn't know at the time the word ghost must, the people that are able to remove their limbs and stuff. This man would sit on a rock, and when he saw me, he laid back, and he would move his hands, fingers like this, and he pulled his arms off his body and then pushed them back on. Then he took and he rolled his head back off his body and then rolled his head back to his body. Now, I was very nonplussed about this. Seriously, I mean, it meant really nothing to me. But he did bite a rock and he gave it to me and we went back. I never even mentioned it to the Mandali when I returned to Mehera. But about 2 years later, we're sitting on the men's side and we were chatting about something and the topic of Kashmir was brought up. And they said, well, now, where did you see did you find Chanji's grave and did you see where Jesus was buried and this and that? And I said, yes. And I said, and that's right, I forgot. I saw that man who rolled his head off his body and pulled his arms across. And they said, you saw a ghost must? And I said, no, I never saw a ghost. He was actually a man. I'm thinking they said ghost. They couldn't believe that I had seen that and came back to Mehera, and 2 years later, it was just happenstance that the topic came up and I just mentioned that I had seen this. And Erich looked at me and he said, how could you have seen this and not come back and told us that you had witnessed that? And I said, Erich, that's meaningless to me. In the morning, I sing Arti with Baba's beloved. I placed my forehead on the pillow that held his feet. What does it mean to me that some man can roll his head off his body? And they looked at me and they thought, that was a really good answer to give, you know. We're not wasting our time teaching you these things about nothing should stand between or even have you glimpse at somebody winking at you, let alone rolling their head off their body. And the reason I remember this when Mehera was talking about it is, I think when you really believe and accept that Baba lived the new life to show us all that his physical presence is not necessary to have his divine presence with you at all times. Think about those who went with him on the new life and those that were asked to stay behind, being told that they would probably never see him again. They all learned that even with not knowing what was going on with Baba, he was with them. And Mehera always used to say that was one of the most great lessons that Baba gave through the new life, was that his presence is with you at all times, even when he is not physically present. So that kind of was triggered in my head. The other thing that happened was, one summer we were sitting on the men's side, and it must have been 8:30, 9 o'clock, and all of a sudden it hovered over Pimplegow, a flying saucer. And you know where room 8 is across, you know in Mandali Hall is, and you sit on the veranda there and you look across and there's room 8 over there where the men eat their lunch. We all went out into the dirt there and we're looking up. Nobody's really saying anything. Helped Pendu come out, with his canes, and I was holding on to his arm looking up. We went back and finished off where we started our conversation, and all of a sudden Eric just started laughing. And we were talking about something serious, and I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "It's the darndest thing," he said. "You see a man roll his head off his body. You don't even mention it for years. You walk out and you see this thing hovering, this saucer that hovers over Pimplegow, and you sit back and don't miss a beat on the conversation." And he said, "How can that be?" He said, "Even when we first saw it, we were astounded." But the thing is, that's the beauty of the Mandali, is they themselves were such examples of how your connection with Baba was direct, and his pleasure and serving at his pleasure was all there was in the world, and they themselves never let that come between anything in their life. They didn't even, they bonded with each other, but their bond was their mutual seeking of Baba's pleasure. They weren't hugging around each other and walking around like they had to learn to do with the Westerners and when the pilgrims would come. That was something that we needed, that they gave because they knew how much Baba's hug meant to them. So those were two things that I kind of hit on. There are three really important stories that I learned from three very important people about innocent mistakes. And these innocent mistakes weren't made necessarily for the people that it happened to in those times. I think they happened so that we could repeat them and be reminded how important what Baba gives each of us in our lives through his love and through his divinity. And I want to kind of go through a couple of those. And the first one, Chanji, who was Meher Baba's secretary, met Baba while he was contemplating suicide at Chapati Beach. He had had some really painful personal and professional experiences, and he had decided life meant nothing more to him, and he was going to walk and throw himself into the ocean and drown himself. So Baba's walking on the strand at the beach with a few of the men, and he sees this lone man standing there, and he sends one of them over to get this man over to him. Chanji meets Baba, and it comes to find out that he was going to commit suicide, that he had had these terrible experiences. He was so depressed. Life held no more meaning for him, and he was just going to drown himself. Well, he ends up coming and becoming Baba's secretary and brings the Dada Chanji family and all this. The point I want to make here is, after a while, his mother sees Chanji doing really, really well, in balance again, and decides it's time to find another wife for him and get his life on track. It just so happens that a very famous Indian astrologer is passing through Bombay. So she quickly takes his chart, and I believe with a couple of his aunties or some of her friends, goes to this astrologer and gives these papers and this chart to this astrologer and says, they're trying to find a wife for him. What direction should his life go? This and that. And the man picks it up, throws it back at him, and he says, "Do you take me for a fool? You've given me the chart of a dead man." Later, when Arnavas was talking to me, she was explaining to me, and this came up because of hearing about all the astrological machinations and people being sent to talk to astrologers to divine their life and make determinations and stuff. Arnavas said that how Baba explained that once you come in his contact and once you're in his orbit, once you are his and you're in his sphere, your destiny changes. Nothing matters. So if God is in absolute total control of your life, why would you care what an astrological chart says when it's meaningless? So I just wanted to kind of make that point. That was one thing that happened and how I got that story. And let's see. You all know who Kumar was? Amit's father. He was a freedom fighter during independence for India. And he had been imprisoned by the British for being not only a freedom fighter, but a member of the Communist Party. And yeah.
Sedition.
Yes. And he had begged God. He was at his wit's end, and he said he was an atheist, and yet he had the audacity to demand not only God's presence, but to put some conditions on God to help him. And if he did this, he would believe in him. And one of them was, you release me, I believe, by 5 the next morning, which I think happened to be a Sunday, when there would be nobody there to sign the papers and there had been no process put in order. And nobody gets released at 5 in the morning, and whatever other conditions he had. But it just so happens that the next morning, it's exactly what happened. He got released from prison. But after he got released, his conditions and his promise to God kind of went into the back, and he went on about his life. And he wasn't really paying attention to what he had promised God he would do. Baba happens to be in the new life up in the Dehradun area, and his path crosses with Kumar. A while later, Baba reminds him, remember what you promised me in jail? Yeah. So one of the things that Kumar told me when he pulled a tin down from the shelf, and in it was the wrappers of some candy. And the reason I'm telling you about what a strong, tough man he was, look how tender his heart was. When he was with Baba, he noticed when Baba would give these candies for prasad, and they would throw the wrapper on the ground. And whenever he could, he'd collect these papers, because that's what God's hand had touched. It wasn't the actual candy. He couldn't even stand the wrapper blowing off in the wind. And he told me some very, very profound things. He said to me, okay. He said, how great our fortune to come into the fold of the Avatar. Once that happens, everything changes. And he got up and he had a fan that was whirling, and he flipped the switch on the fan. And then he said, look, the blades keep spinning even though the switch is turned off. There's no more electricity running the blades, but the blades keep spinning. He says that's what our sanskars do in life. But how blessed we are, because the Lord has cut the power, and now all our sanskars are in His hands at His will. He will unwind them to our benefit, and never allow someone say they can unwind your sanskaras for their own self-aggrandizement. And then as the fan got slower and slower, he stuck his fingers through the grate and he said, do you see this? My finger represents His divine will. he not only cuts the power to the source, but he can actually stop the spinning of your sanskaras. He can stop it in an instant and give you everything. No one can do that but God. So that was, somebody who was so strong and bold and vibrant and virile had that sensitivity. And as he's telling me this, tears are coming down his cheeks. The other story was about, Padre was also one of the tough ones. And everybody was shocked when he had made the decision to remain behind during the new life. Everybody thought for sure he would go with Baba. And one day I was talking with him about it, and this fellow comes up in a rickshaw and gets out, and Padre and I were smoking some beedies on the veranda in front of Mandali Hall at Lower Meherabad. And this fellow comes out and he sits down and he says to Padre, he says, "How can I love Baba more?" And Padre looks like this, takes a few more puffs on his beedi, clears his throat and spits, and he says to this fellow, he says, "Why do you ask me about love? What do I know about love? You want to know about love? Take the rickshaw and go out to Merazad." He said, "But if you want to know about service and how to be ripped to shreds in the process, have a seat." That was his mindset. That was the way he lived his life. But the fascinating thing to me is when I said to him, how could you have not gone with Baba on the new life? He said, "I sensed, because Baba intimated to me something the night before, that he wanted me to remain behind." And he said, "Even though it killed me, I had to say no, because I knew my beloved wanted me to remain behind." And when you look at what happened during the new life and what Padre did to save it at times and how he was used by Baba, it's just another example of not even his love for his master, not even his devotion to Meher Baba got in the way of his relationship with God and his duty to God. And I remember when that struck me, when he was talking about that, even his love didn't get in the way of his connection to God. And I'm still just speaking for me personally, just trying to love Baba is so difficult at times. And yet here's somebody whose love for Baba was so intense and so beautiful, but it wasn't going to stand in the way of him serving God and what God expected from him. So those were three very important lessons that I learned about not letting things interfere with the relationship. Can I have 30 seconds? Okay, 30 seconds. The last one was about having other people come in and intervene, especially with illnesses. Arnavas's mother's son was quite ill and in the crib. Baba was out of the area, and she called one of these healers in to come help, give some chants, and then he tied a ribbon around the crib. Baba came a couple days later and saw that ribbon and said, "What is this ribbon here?" And Bachamai said, he was ill, fever, sick, I was worried. So I called the healer. He came and said some chants and some prayers and then tied the ribbon. And Baba said, "Is this child that man's, or is this child my child? Do you think when I'm not here in your house, or when I'm not even in Bombay, that I'm not here for you, that my presence isn't here? You don't think I'm taking care of this child?" So even way, way back in those days, his constant message was to stay away from anybody or anything that was not of him, from his hand, that was not directly from him. He was starting to train people a whole new way about being with God and when you have the beloved. So those are just a few things that were very, impressional about me, and then I'm going to share the rest of the stuff as it
referring to Sufism Reoriented.
And not, you see, our main thing is not this karmic and past lives and this adjusting. This is, as we said, very strongly.
That is for us. That we.
Well, that may be, but not for the. Another thing, like Jim Mackay wrote in his letter to Jack Small. It's an open letter, a worded letter. I really didn't understand much of it. It was wordy. I mean, as my intelligence isn't on intellect isn't on a par with that kind of words, but still, I read it through, tried to understand it. But for instance, when he says that Adi made that remark in a private interview, closed his eyes, clapped his hands, said, Jai Baba, said, Baba told me twice that he speaks through Moshe. How can you expect us to believe that? When we have known Adi for nearly half a century as intimately as we have, would you believe it if we said, so-and-so says, Alan Cohen is still taking LSD? It is as ridiculous as that.
Adi did not discuss, just for clarification, he did not discuss with you the meeting he had with...
In fact, if I were to tell you, but if I were to tell you what he said, he was not very happy about the thing, honestly.
Did you all hear that?
No.
Okay.
Really
sorry that this is...
Summarize it.
Yeah, she's saying that they published something he wrote something in a letter to Jack Small. He had a private meeting with Adi K. Irani and said that Adi clapped twice enthusiastically and said, Baba just told me that he speaks directly through Ivy Deuce. And then also in Sufism Speaks Out, there's a long section where Jim implies that Adi had a conversation with him about God Speaks, and Jim essentially set Adi K. Irani straight about a few things. You can read it in Sufism Speaks Out. And Vesta was there in Adi's office when Jim was there a few times, so she's going to share her impressions.
It was a Friday. I was coming in from doing some work that I'd been sent in, and I was on my way back out to Meherazad. And I was sitting in Adi's office collecting the mail and whatever things he was sending out to Meherazad. My back was to the door, and Adi was at his desk facing out toward the door to the inner office. And all of a sudden, he looks up, and I wrote this down. I want to be very exact here. Okay. In fact, I'm going to read what I wrote. I think it'll be faster. This all leads me to the arrival of a pilgrim who wore a white robe, walked barefoot most of the time, and seemed to have some odd habits that at first seemed benign, causing no undue concern. But one Friday, I was sitting in Adi's office after doing some work in the bazaar. Adi was repairing a packet of mail and other info for me to take back to Meherazad, where I was now residing. All of a sudden, he looks up and asks, "How can I help you?" I turned around and saw Jim Mackay standing there, moving his head around, moving his fingers in furtive movements, and seemingly in a trance. Adi asked him if he was okay or should he send for the doctor. Now, mind you, at this time, if there were 10 pilgrims coming to Meherabad or Meherazad, that was a tidal wave. I mean, 10 people was like, oh my God, there's going to be 10 people. So they knew everybody. We all registered with the police. They knew if something went on in the bazaar and Adi found out about it, chits were sent by messengers to both Meherabad and Meherazad. Everybody knew everything about every single pilgrim. So we were aware that Mr. Mackay was there. Mr. Mackay replied that he was working very hard to remain in his body and in the gross world because he had visited all 5 perfect masters' tombs and they had elevated him spiritually. I heard this with my own ears. Adi told him there must be some misunderstanding, as that was not the role of those 5 perfect masters. Their charge was to bring down God, to become man, to raise up man, to become God. Adi explained that they handed over their charge to Merwan, as he was called at that time, when their work with him was done. The perfect masters gave the world the avatar, And this is the greatest gift of all and not to be trifled with. Adi continued explaining, no one even knows who the 5 perfect masters are at the present time, because Baba's advent is still most powerful for at least 100, maybe even 200 years. Mr. Mackie continued to stand there and make odd movements with his head, his eyes, and his fingers. He seemed to be chanting and mumbling, and it was really unintelligible. Adi finally said to him, "Sir, wake up! Are you trying to hypnotize me? Do you take me for a fool?" Mr. Mackie continued to make more claims about his enlightenment given from the 5 perfect masters, how he was now on the plains and having difficulty with gross consciousness. Adi continued to refute each and every claim, very patiently using Baba's own words, the discourses, stories where Baba impressed upon all those with him how the spiritual world works, but most importantly, how it does not work. I remember Mr. Mackie arguing with Adi about his newly ordained place in the world and as to his elevated stature, and Adi becoming rather irritated with him. Finally, Adi told him, instead of going to graves of dead masters with no charge, why not go to the samadhi of the master of all of them, who is the Lord incarnate, the avatar of the age? Have his darshan. After Mr. Mackie left Adi's office, he immediately wrote a letter out to Mehera. And I remember Adi even telling Mr. Mackie, "Sir, I think you're delusional." He also told him that how he is claiming he had an elevated status and how he got elevation could not have happened. It was not Baba's way, nor was it even possible as per how Baba explained spiritual concepts in great detail in this Advent.
Great.
That's...
Fantastic. Thank you.
I mean, there's more, but I think it'll fit in better with something else. Okay. Is there any questions about that? Anybody have any? I mean, Adi was pretty clear.
You know,
You speak loud.
There is a mic out here. Please come to the mic.
Yeah.
He asked me if Adi used any cuss words, and yes, he did.
Did it begin with, what letter did it begin with?
F.
Thank you. Yeah. Go, come up to the mic if you want.
There is a mic here. There is a mic here. Anybody who wishes to ask a question, please come here.
I don't want to. I forget the question. I forget what I'm going to say by the time I get up there.
Well, what is it? And I'll repeat it.
They already forgotten. But so when I went to India, Vinu Karash, I think his name was, he took us to 3 of the perfect masters.
Mina Barucha.
So why did Adi allow him to do that? Adi was alive. Why were they letting us go to the tombs? Because at each tomb I had a different impression.
Do you want to answer that?
Babajan's tomb, I felt like dancing. I felt elated. And I went to Kasni Maharaj.
I know Mina's connection if you want.
And
Yeah.
as soon as I got off the bus, it was like a ghost town. And I heard a voice say, "Aha, no, I've got you." And you know, then when I went to Sai Baba's, I felt the humanity. So I had impressions, and I've always wanted to go back to the
I think American.
to the other two.
Yeah, go ahead. You do.
I'm wondering
Yes.
why would Adi allow that? He felt so strongly. Why did he allow?
Can I address that? What Adi meant when he said those tombs were dead spaces was in terms of making somebody God realized. The only role they had was bringing Baba to the realization of his own avatarhood. They did not perform that role for anybody else. That was their sole purpose. That does not mean that their energy is gone. That does not mean that their power has dissipated. No. A perfect master's power and his presence and his energy lives on and on and on. Today, if you go to Ajmer or you go to Alandi, where Jnaneshwar's body is, he took living samadhi. it's still very powerful. That does not mean that we shouldn't go there. Baba said there is no need for you to go there, but if you go there once, bow down in my name, and come back.
Well, I always thought that Baba said that I have the traits of each one of these five masters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can answer your question. What he said, in the avataric age, they bring the avatar down and then they give all their charges to him.
Yeah.
And they are completely with him during his advent, which lasts during the time he's in his physical form, and for 100 or 200 years afterwards. So if you go to any of those tombs seeking spiritual power or advancement, you can't get it. It's not there. It's all the authority. Wait, let me finish. All the authority, according to Meher Baba, all the authority during the avataric age is solely with Meher Baba, not the five perfect masters and no one else.
And the perfect masters themselves would say,
That's why-
I have
that's
given
why.
my charge to Merwan now.
Yeah, Vesta, let me just respond to that. Exactly.
Well, that's why you go there. You go
That's
and
why
see,
you went there.
find out what was his place like. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you go there for a charge.
Peter, can I finish what I'm saying? You didn't go there and come back saying, Sai Baba, Baba Jan, Upasni Maharaj, they gave me a spiritual lift. They moved me to the sixth plane. You never said that. Mr. Mackie did come back and repeat this to Adi and say, they moved me to the sixth plane. They gave me a spiritual lift. Now, that was not their
Impossible.
role.
It's impossible.
They could not do that.
And when I was in Washington, in one of his discourses that he gave to the people there, he did talk about his trips to see the five perfect masters. And of course, at the time, I didn't understand it. But the sense was exactly what you say, that he went there to get something to aggrandize his status. That's how he took it, rather than somebody just going to see it or experience it with the understanding that Baba said.
We are coming up to 4:45. We may be able to hear a few more clips, or we may be able to turn this over to the audience. Is there anything the audience would like to contribute? Is there anything that they would like to say? Yes. There will be small groups. There will be a group discussion. Yeah, there will.
We're going to have a kegger in the back.
And then also tomorrow, tell them tomorrow.
Should we keep doing some tapes and see what's here? There's some good stuff here still.
Tomorrow, Peter is going to be doing Hafiz, and one moment, let me just finish what I'm going to say, then I'll come right to you. Hafiz and Sufism today will be dealt with by Peter tomorrow in 2 presentations, and then the rest of the day is given over to questions and answers, small group discussions, and a large group discussion at the end. So yes, please.
Yes, I would just like to make the request that when you put all the information together, which I really love that you did, that if it's online or something, that you include as much of this and whatever else that we couldn't listen to today.
Yeah.
So I would love to be able to go back and really look at it more.
Well,
Mehera Legacy Project, they have the website, it's all there.
As I understand it, there will be DVDs, because this thing is being professionally recorded today, and the DVDs will be available for people to obtain. But also, as Vesta said, the Mehera Legacy website has much longer versions of these tapes, which you can go and listen to at your leisure.
Yes, they're transcribed.
Yeah, you can do this at home, absolutely. Yeah?
I think it was you, Peter, who relayed this story about the glowing globe.
That was a joke. It was a joke.
No, he didn't have that experience.
Unfortunately, it was a joke. No, it was a joke. I want to say tomorrow, I actually am trained as a Sufi scholar, so when I listened to these tapes, there were references to traditional Sufism that did not ring true with me. So what I'm presenting tomorrow is what is traditional Sufism and why did it get to the point that Meher Baba had to reorient it. And that's tied in with Hafiz's poetry and Baba's own sayings about true spirituality with the avatar.
I would like to add something here.
One moment. Alisa's going to go ahead.
A few days after we went and heard Erich's letter,
we were sitting in I was sitting in the trust office, and the question came up, how could the Sufis have gone for this? And Erich brought the story of Anne Conlon coming to. Does everybody know that story?
That's a really good story.
In 1961, Baba said there was a certain time period when he was in Pune that anyone could come and be with him for an hour, I think it was. And Anne Conlon, who had missed him, said, I'm going to take that. And she literally went over the weekend to India. But she sent word ahead that she was coming. And so for a period of time, people were expecting this Anne Conlon was coming. And nobody knew when, but Anne Conlon's coming. So Sohrab, who's one of Rustam and Sohrab, one of the twins, decided to come as Anne Conlon to Guru Prasad. And he dressed up and he put a thing on and he had a purse and everything, and he came in and Anne Conlon has come. And everybody, here's Sohrab. They knew Sohrab, he was there every day. But, of course, Baba knew what was happening, but everybody else was like, Anne Conlon's come, finally, yeah, he's come. And Mani is the one who broke it because the purse that Sohrab had over his arm, she recognized she'd given it to Perrine, so she recognized the purse. So Erich used that story and he said, do you see, if you're expecting something, and then when anything comes up, you don't have your discrimination. That's right. You see what you want to see. And I think over the years, the Sufis have been so primed with this story that they're going to have this illumined Murshid, that there's just, that's what they get.
Perfect segue.
And that's they feel that they have the imprimatur that Baba had said there would be 700 years of illumined Murshids. Nonsense. Anyone who was around, who heard the meeting, said that's not what Baba said. And Baba then went out of his way on 2 different occasions when Don Stevens came to Meherazad. The first thing he had Erich tell Don, he said, by the way, tell Ivy that I have promised that from time to time there will be an illumined Murshid. 2 times he said that. And that's the story of that. So the Sufis today, I'll tell you, feel that they're guaranteed this illumined Murshid, and that's what they see. And so it goes on from there.
Up until the meeting with the Sufis came, when I was at Meherazad, a lot of this stuff was coming to their attention either through letters, through personal visits, through sometimes even cables, etc., about what was going on in the confusion. And Mehera used to get so upset and so distressed that people would think that Baba had not come to show them the personal relationship with God, that you needed no one else. And that's what was different. No priest, no nothing. You could develop your relationship with God on a personal level. And one of Baba's orders to Mehera was to eat well and to sleep well. And one of the things he said just before he left his physical form was he called the women to him and told them that you must keep Mehera happy even if you have to tell her a white lie. So some of the things she didn't even fall on her ears because it was so distressing to her. But sometimes I was asked to come sleep on the carpet in the main house because they didn't want Mehera staying up past midnight so that she could sleep well. And I'd watch her, and if it would get close to midnight, I'd quietly go up and stand by her because she'd stand by Baba's photos. And she was weeping, Baba, how can I tell them more about your love? How can I explain to them that you're there for them? How can I tell them? How can I tell them more about the new life? How can I? And she felt like she wasn't giving enough love or explaining enough or sharing enough, that somehow that burden rested partly on her shoulders. And she was so concerned that Baba, You sacrificed your health. You had 2 accidents. You fasted yourself into ill health. You walked. She would just go on and list one sacrifice, one suffering after another that Baba had experienced. That's how deeply wounded she felt, that somehow people were believing that someone should manipulate your karma, or you should go to a psychic or seek astrological help or that kind of stuff. It was so disturbing and distressing after the life they had lived with Baba. So that's